Sorry, some technical difficulties. Give me a sec.
Well, it looks
We are live.
We are live now. Perfect. Thank you very much, Ryan. Welcome everyone to the January 19th, 2021 Heritage Richmond Hill meeting. Tonight's meeting is an electronic meeting being held during an emergency pursuant to section 238, 3.3 of the Municipal Act 2001. Due to efforts to contain the spread of COVID-19 and to protect all individuals, city facilities will not be open to the public to attend meetings until further notice. We have received one regret from Councillor Silhouettes for tonight's meeting. The public had the opportunity to submit written correspondence regarding agenda matters by email to the clerk's office. All written correspondence received by noon today would have been included on the agenda, but there was none received. The public also had the opportunity to apply to appear as an electronic delegation, either by video conference or by telephone by noon today. We have received one delegation for agenda item 5.2. With that, can I have a motion for the adoption of tonight's agenda? Thank you, Doris. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. That is approved. Are there any pecuniary interests to disclose tonight? Seeing none. Thank you very much. Moving on to the minutes of previous meeting. Can I have a motion for the approval of the minutes of our previous meeting? Thank you, Dan. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? Seeing none, the minutes of our previous meeting is approved. On to item number 4.1, we have a delegation by Murray Evans, Evans Planning Inc., and Mark Hall from MW Hall Corporation regarding a notice of intent to demolish 16 Center Street West related to item 5.2. Mr. Evans, you have 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Murray Evans. I'm a planning consultant, and I have been asked to help out in with regard to what will hopefully be the development of this particular property at 16 Center Street and the adjacent property to the west, which is 20 Center Street. I really don't have too much to say because it's not my area of expertise, but Mr. Mark Hall is here tonight as well. He is the heritage architect who prepared the cultural heritage impact assessment. And so he may offer a few comments after I'm finished. We'll split our 5 minutes because I won't be needing near enough of it. All I would like to put before the committee is we're here in support of the recommendations of the staff who've reviewed the CHIA, and they are recommending that the property not be designated. We're obviously supporting of that. The longer term objective would be to seek a redevelopment of these two properties to implement the policies of the municipality's official plan. So this is quite frankly a key step in that progress. All I would like to point out is that both Mr. Hall and city staff have viewed this particular property from the requirements of the Ontario Heritage Act, and they have found that it is, while an older building, it has been sufficiently altered throughout the course of time that it doesn't have the particular merits of retention. So I will basically step back. I'll ask Mr. Hall to pipe in if he sees fit. And our primary purpose here tonight is to be a resource to the committee to answer any questions you may have. So Mark, can you, or if you're there, can you offer anything if you see fit, please?
Good evening. Of course, we're in support of de-designating this property and allowing it to be redeveloped in accord with the downtown core official plan. It's the building, the one house Actually, yeah, the one house in particular at number 16 has been substantially modified. Originally, it was oriented directly to Yonge Street, and as a result, had a veranda that faced Yonge Street that no longer exists, and the house is not has lost in my personal view, actually my staff. It doesn't merit the continuation of its designation, and proposed redevelopment is recommended.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hall and Mr. Evans. You finished just on time. Thank you. So with that, moving on to our regular scheduled business, or new scheduled business rather, item 5.2 for the same property, 16 Center Street West. There's a notice of intent to demolish and a recommendation from planning and infrastructure staff. Can I have a motion for that item? Councillor West, thank you very much. I believe staff have a presentation with regards to this property. Staff do not have a presentation regarding this property. Is there any discussion that needs to be had? People would like to make comments. Councillor West, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Happy New Year to everybody. And given that it is the 19th of January, I think we all have to stop saying Happy New Year after this point. Anyway, I thank you, Mr. Evans and Mr. Hall, for your presentation, and for staff for writing the staff report. I always find it sad when we allow a building that is older like this to be demolished. And I must admit, I usually go into reading the first few words of reports like this, kind of rooting for the building that the story will end up, that we'll be recommending it to be designated. But I also understand that in a number of cases, and I think this is a good example of one of them, that there's just nothing left to save. I actually really appreciated on page 4 of the staff report seeing the before photo. That was a really beautiful building, and when you looked at on page 5 with the building the way it is right now, I mean, there's really nothing left. So I appreciate the analysis that has gone through by the applicant, but then vetted by our staff, that really weigh this against the criteria that are in the Planning Act that we would use if we were to designate the building. And it's pretty clear from the report that we're a long way away from that being a possibility. So I would move the recommendation that is in the staff report, and those would be my comments. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor West. Any other comments, thoughts? Dan, please go ahead.
Sorry, I had to take myself off mute. Happy New Year to everybody. I agree with Councillor West. I had one question, or more of a clarification, or maybe supplementary comments on the report. Item number 8 talks about conservation strategy. So I do appreciate all the points that have been made about the changes to the building, that sort of thing. So pretty much in agreement with the conclusions. But I really like that last point there on the conservation strategy, and it talks about salvaging, something out of this in terms of digital or photographs or measurements, that sort of thing. I was wondering, like, given this particular building, what's significant that one would actually do this recording? I think this should be a standard for any of the buildings we demolish, but if there's been so many changes that have been done to the building, that there really isn't anything redeeming for us to really even try to document. I can appreciate that as well. So I just my question is basically, is there anything in this existing, building that you could point to specifically that maybe that item 8 would fit in with?
If I can comment again, that's a standard phrase that we have in the heritage impact assessments that we do. We have not been into the interior of the building, but as we noted in the report, the original entrance and the sort of central stair, if you will, went from east to west. The door was on the east side of the facade, and there may be we have not been into the interior to see if there are any details remaining. And at some point, before demolition actually takes place, it might be worthwhile to be able to enter the building and to see if there are any remaining elements whatsoever. It's clearly from the outside, any of the important early architectural character elements of the building have been removed or covered up, and so that was the only reason for leaving that documentation statement into the report.
Sure. Okay, no, that's good. I appreciate that as being a standard point. I think that's something we should always do, especially in these cases where we're in a demolishing frame of mind. So thank you very much. I appreciate that. No further questions.
Thank you, Dan. Marge, please go ahead. You're on mute, Marge. Sorry, Marge, you're on mute. You want to unmute your...
Should be better. Sorry. So I have 4 points. First, I noted that this application was brought to the planning department back in November 27th. So I'm curious that we was not on the December meeting. So that's number 1. Second, I do want to highlight the point that it was said in the staff report that it doesn't represent an example of any particular period. This it was a farmhouse, and I think in a sense, I didn't like that statement in there. I'm not objecting to it being demolished. I agree with everyone else, but I do think it was. It was built in 1872. That is the year that Richmond Hill became incorporated. So, it's like almost like a slap in the face. I saw it as saying it had almost no context, but that was the year that Richmond Hill started. So there's that point. And lastly, I'm surprised that there was one of these heritage reports done and you never went inside the building. So if you could explain that too. So those are my comments. Thank you.
So maybe if I can ask staff to respond to the first part with regards to the agenda item in November versus today. Was that your question, Marge?
That was, yes. I just want a clarification.
Can staff please clarify that?
Yes, through the chair, we received the report in its first version in October, but we were not satisfied with the content of the chair. And it was really only until a month and a half ago that we considered the report is actually complete as per our terms of reference.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. Mr. Hall, with regards to the other parts of the question regarding the significance of the year that the building was built, and in terms of visiting the interiors of the building, if you have any comments, please go ahead.
The reason that it took a while after the 27th to what we added to the report was we finally were able to ascertain the information regarding the chain of property ownership, and so that was the main additional component that we had, and in assessing the chain of property ownership, there was nothing significant that would change our opinion that we had in the earlier report in terms of its heritage significance. Yes, it was a farmhouse, and it at the where the entrance is on the north side right now. I think we pointed out in the report at that in 1872 or so. There was very little development beyond the downtown, and there was probably some view and some rationale for a veranda along the north side of the building. But in the ensuing years, the main veranda at the facing Young Street was removed. And so there's a sort of a mincing main entrance right now, but it just lost its character as an early farmhouse when as Richmond Hill changed, and that character, the basic shape, yes, but there are many other structures in Richmond Hill that have that basic shape to it. The basic shape didn't strike us as enough of a reason to maintain the structure as compared to the redevelopment of the downtown core with the higher intensity. And so that's why we thought long and hard about retaining it.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Any other questions for Mr. Hall? Marge, did you have, or was that satisfactory? You're on mute again?
Yeah. Could he comment on not going inside the building to make the heritage assessment? Like, I'm surprised at that. So just, I don't, other heritage reports we've got, there has been detailed work inside. Is it the case that it was not seen as worthwhile? It's just something that struck me, and I feel compelled to ask.
Thank you, Marge. Mr. Hall?
There's nothing in the designation of the structure that relates to the interior, and as I said, because the main entrance to the house had moved from the east facade to the north facade, any kind of central staircase that was there has, we assume, has disappeared, and we don't typically include interior documentation of a structure like this.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Any other questions, comments? Dan, I saw your hand up again, correct? Please go ahead.
Sorry, again, I'm mute. Sorry, I just had an afterthought question, more to through you to staff. The picture that is in the staff report, I'm sort of curious. I know in this particular case it was just a listed property, so really it doesn't really impact anything other than we have this inventory of properties, and like this original picture, I mean, to Marge's point, is very reflective of what the true character of the building was initially, and representing the town. I'm just wondering, what do we do with a photograph like this in this particular instance? Is it kept in any archive that can be accessed historically, or like, it's more of a curiosity question than anything. Thanks.
We do have a ongoing current real file system and not digital, because all the buildings as in the inventory, we set up a filing system for it, no matter how little and how much information we might have. And those are paper, those are sketches, those could be black and white photograph, could be clippings. So we gather as much as we can on those various different properties, and we keep them with us. Even though they might be removed from the inventory, we still keep them. We just put in a list, a slip that says it might be removed or so forth. So this is the only that I know files in the city that does not get archives elsewhere, because that's all we have. And so, if we have spare or buildings that was not included, but we have other information, we usually give it to the central library. So we generally would have a relationship with the librarian there, and we would actually take a look at the information every few years to see what can be transferred if we need to.
So is that's more of an ad hoc sort of process? It's not automatic. It just depends on, I guess, cleanup at some point in the future.
Yes, because it is the amount of information that goes in now is not as frequent, except for the heritage impact assessment, because we rely on that now. But those other information really came from residual donation or researches that was done 30 years ago. I mean, it's accumulative. So whatever we have on the file, we just have them.
Right.
And when someone wants to research on a building, we go back to Alpha and see if there's anything that could be of help. But
Yeah.
we don't know exactly what we have until we get there. Through the chair, I just want to clarify that the building is actually listed, it's not designated. I just want to clarify that.
Thank you. Al, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to comment, and I believe the report is Mr. Hall's. I just wanted to thank him from me personally. I appreciated all the pictures that were put in the report. Many times in the past, we've considered properties, and I know Dan and definitely and myself, we've gone online and looked at pictures of the current situation to see what we're dealing with at the time. And so that was very helpful. And so I wanted to pass those thanks on to him. I also wanted to thank staff. I appreciate the effort they went through in this process. And I do think that I do agree with their report. This is, I think, another instance of a property that had at one point some value, but unfortunately it slipped through our fingers once again. And it's just too far gone. When I noticed the pictures from the staff report, I'm seeing basement windows, and I could be wrong, but I somehow doubt that in 1876 they were putting basement windows in the property. So it seems that major changes have been done to this building, and it's just unfortunately it's just not worth saving at this point. It is regrettable, but unfortunately that's the situation we've come up against. And so I am in favor of the staff report. Thank you.
Thank you, Al. So with that, let's call the vote on item 5.2, parts A and B. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed. That is approved. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Evans and Mr. Hall. Have a good night. We will continue with item 5.1, presentation by staff. I believe Tracy Steele and Joanne Long. Please go ahead.
Good evening, members of Heritage Richmond Hill. Tonight, we have prepared a presentation on the monitoring, maintenance, and enforcement of the city's heritage properties. This presentation is prepared jointly by myself, Joanne Leung, and Tracy Steele, Director of Community Standards of the Community Services Department. Next, please. So we'll start with just a quick outline of what we are going to speak about today. First, we're going to touch on the tools that we have on our hands to manage our property standards. Secondly, we will describe what property standards bylaw is. And then we will add to how heritage property amendment is added to the property standard bylaw and what it means. And next, Tracy will specifically talk a bit about the enforcement approaches and the processes where our tools can be utilized. And also staff has taken some time to do a bit of municipal benchmarking to look at our neighboring municipalities in Ontario, how they approach the protection of their heritage properties. And finally, we have a short summary. Next, please. So in terms of tools, I could generally say that there are two areas of approach. One would be when there is a development application that is involved a heritage property. And when there's a development application, be it site plan application or subdivision application, through the process, we are able to negotiate and find a solution for the alteration or the retention or the move of whatever the heritage structure is on that property, and we can manage this through a development site plan approval process. And with that, once a resolution is reached, then we can actually get to an agreement that is called a heritage agreement. And the heritage agreement will generally be based on the conservation management plan that we have come to approve. And that agreement will cite out, will talk specifically the kind of alteration that is going to be done and how it should be done. And with the agreement also comes with a letter of credit. And when the project is completed, the town will, the city will look at the work, and when it meets the agreement standard, then we return the letter of credit to the owner. And the second approach is where there is actually no development approval process in play, and when the property is standing alone. And that's when we use the property standard bylaw as our main tool. And the standard bylaw, the property standard bylaw is a community standard bylaw that is enacted by the municipality through the authority of the Ontario Building Code Act. Next.
So hello everyone, I'm going to talk a bit about the property standards bylaw now. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with property standards bylaws that municipalities have. As Joanne mentioned, they are enacted under authority that's given to the municipalities under the Building Code Act. And the Building Code Act specifies that the municipality also needs provisions in its official plan related to property maintenance and occupancy standards in order to have a property standards bylaw. So in Richmond Hill, we have that as well in our current official plan and in previous official plans as well, because our property standards bylaw was enacted in 1999. It's been subject to some amendments since that time, mostly minor amendments, but one in June of 2010 in particular was an amendment specifically related to the protection of heritage properties. Our property standards bylaw is known as number 7999 and is part of the city's municipal code chapter 1010. But what's most important to set out, perhaps to understand perhaps about property standards bylaw is it sets minimum maintenance standards for property. And it does require that the owners of those properties maintain their properties to those minimum standards. And we talk about minimum standards because a lot of people come to us expecting that they want to see a property maintained to a higher standard, but the bylaw doesn't do that. It sets what's the minimum, and that's what we have the power to enforce. Next slide, please. So this slide just gives a very high level summary of some of the types of things that the property standards bylaw does regulate. Yard maintenance, surface conditions in the exterior of the building, structural components of the building are regulated. Utilities, including lighting, there's certain standards for those, as well as standards for things like fences, retaining walls, and signs. There are clauses related to vacant properties, and if you're going to leave your property unattended for a certain length of time, what you need to do. Accessory buildings are also regulated, and this does apply to rental properties as well, obviously, and it's always the owner of the property who is responsible. Next slide. So just to go into a little bit more detail for some of those aspects of the property standards bylaw, and we picked two to discuss here because they do relate to some heritage properties. So in terms of structural components, what the property bylaw says generally is that things like foundations, walls, beams, and floors, roof slabs, and balconies need to be structurally sound and in good repair. And then it goes into some detail about some specific things that you can't have in your property and need to be repaired. Things like deteriorated wood, damaged siding, or broken stucco. It also has some clauses, specific regulations around windows and doors. They need to be in good repair, weather tight, free from rot, no damaged screens, and no broken glass. In terms of vacant properties, the general statement that applies is that they need to be maintained to prevent risk of fire, accidents, trespassing, and other hazardous and dangerous conditions. And then more specifically, it establishes that you need to board up the windows and doors with color coordinated exterior that are with materials that are color coordinated with the exterior of the finish. And utilities need to be disconnected if the owner is going to be away for more than 90 days. So again, these are just some examples of some of the specific things that you'll find in the property standards bylaw. And obviously there's a lot more. It's quite a lengthy document. Next slide. So I'm going to turn it back over to Joanne now to talk specifically about the heritage property requirement that's in the bylaw.
In June of 2010, the property standard bylaw was amended in the city to include the following requirement for the heritage properties. So we added that phrase that you see is applicable town-wide minimum property standard for the maintenance of heritage attributes of designated property under Part 4 and 5 of Ontario as outlined in the staff report that we provided will be applied. So we apply. So now we on 2010, we amended the standards, property standard bylaw, adding the heritage property standard to our bylaw, to our enforcement. So that includes Part 4 of the designation of the Ontario Heritage Act. That's the individual properties, as well as Part 5, which is provided for the heritage conservation districts. Please note that this actually bylaw only applies to designated building. It does not apply to listed buildings. Next slide, please. So the intent of the heritage property amendment to the property standard bylaw came from the notion of demolition by neglect. Demolition by neglect is defined as a purposeful or unintentional action or inaction that leads to the building and structure's deterioration to a point where it's difficult to repair. And the loss of these attributes and features or the demolition of entire structures are really not appropriate options because these are non-renewable and they're very valuable to the community. So this phenomenon of demolition by neglect of heritage properties has been an issue running throughout the heritage community. And so in 2005, with the review of the Ontario Heritage Act, it was amended that a new provision will be contained and will be added to enable municipalities to set out standards to maintain the heritage attributes of designated properties under Part 4 and 5, above and beyond the minimum standard that's provided for by the standard property standard bylaw under the Building Code Act. Next, please. So what does that mean by minimal standard? How do we what does that mean when we talk about minimal property standard for heritage property? Well, what we need to note is that the difference is beyond the basic property standard bylaw that the requirement. We want to maintain the heritage properties attributes. So those attributes will be defined in the designating bylaw of the property itself. So if the properties, the designating bylaw specifically talk about the round window to the east, that window would be the specific attributes that needs to be protected, in addition to the basic structure. Secondly is that the attributes should be repaired rather than replaced. But if replacement is required, then the material used should be the same type as the original material. We also require that utilities has to be provided to prevent fluctuating humidity or temperature that may damage the building. And finally, vacant or damaged buildings should be secure in a way that minimize damage to building fabric. Next, please. I will go back to Tracy.
So this slide is a very basic illustration of a spectrum of enforcement approaches that municipalities apply to. It can be different offenses within a bylaw or different bylaws overall. So, and it ranges on the left-hand side from what we call complaint-based enforcement, which is when we only investigate something when we receive a complaint that someone is not complying with the bylaw from the public. So there's no monitoring that's done. And typically, even if staff are in the field and they notice that someone is not complying with the bylaw, they wouldn't investigate it or open a file unless they believe that it poses a health, safety, or property damage risk. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we have what we call proactive enforcement. And this would be the opposite of what I just explained, where staff or a number of staff are designated to routinely monitor sites for a specific offense. And they would go to those sites and look to make sure everything is in compliance. And the city would also initiate its own investigations if the city or if staff observe non-compliance issues. So this is presented as a spectrum because there's various places along this line that different types of bylaws might fall into. Some, like for example, licensing bylaws, we do proactively monitor. There are officers that attend sites, for example, when we know that tow trucks are going to be called, and they're constantly making sure that all of the tow trucks that attend that site are licensed under the city's bylaws. In terms of our property standards bylaw, generally it's very much closer to the left end of the spectrum, the complaint-based enforcement. We wait to receive complaints from the public, and only when we receive complaints from the public do we investigate issues. Next slide, please. Once an issue is identified, there's various enforcement approaches or options that the city has and to try and get compliance with the bylaws. So the first one on the list here, voluntary compliance using education and public awareness. Typically, most of the issues that we investigate are resolved this way, actually. Over 90% of the complaints that we receive, we're able to bring people into compliance through education and discussions and with that owner. Oftentimes, people don't know that they're not in compliance. Oftentimes, people don't really care that they're not in compliance until we bring it to their attention or they hear that they're bothering their neighbor. And then usually most people are fairly cooperative in resolving those issues. And that's how we resolve most bylaw complaints. The second thing that we can use to try to get compliance are tickets and fines. As most of you probably know, tickets and fines are commonly used for things like parking enforcement. There's two different types of tickets that the city has ability to issue. One is under the Provincial Offences Act. We're able to issue tickets. Those ones can be contested at Provincial Offences Court. And the second type of ticket we can issue is through the city's administrative monetary penalty system. And rather than being contested at court, if you get what we call an AMPS penalty, you come into the city and go through the city system for adjudicating that ticket. Now, not all bylaws have the abilities for tickets or fines, and some are under the Provincial Offences Act or under the AMPS penalty system only. We actually currently don't have ability to issue tickets under property standards, so this is not an option for property standards right now. The next type of enforcement are charges, and I think this is what most people think about when they think about bylaw enforcement. We often hear, why don't you just charge them? When you charge someone, it's called, you submit an information to the court and a summons to the person to attend court. And the matter is, the regional prosecutor prosecutes the offense ticket that, or the charge that we issue. And the resolution is decided upon by a justice in the provincial offenses court. And these result in the application of fines, or they can result in the court ordering that the defendant do something to resolve the issue. And then finally, municipalities also have the ability to undertake work to resolve the issue itself. So we can do work to resolve the issue. And then if it's associated with a specific property, we can recover our costs through applying those costs to the tax roll. So the property owner has to pay them. Now we use this last approach typically very sparingly and only in circumstances where it's health and safety concern if it doesn't get resolved. So typically we mostly use this to remove hazardous trees. So if someone has a hazardous tree on their property and they're gone, they're a vacant landowner, or they live in another country and they're not here to fix their property, then we will go on it and remove that hazardous tree because we don't want it to fall and hurt someone or something. And then we apply that to the tax roll. There are obviously a lot of issues associated with someone or the municipality just going on someone else's property and doing work. And that's why we tend to use that sparingly. Next slide, please. And I'm just going to let Pamela go through this last slide at the end to talk about how other municipalities approach enforcement to heritage buildings.
Thanks, Tracy. Happy New Year, everyone. So we reached out to municipalities across Ontario to see if they had heritage-specific property standards bylaw policies and how it's enforced. The majority of the municipalities do a complaint-based approach, and most of these complaints come from residents as well as members of their municipal heritage committee and councillors. And of the 2 municipalities that did a more proactive approach, there was no specific schedule as to how they would monitor these properties. It was just done as part of their regular office duties, going to work or going to other site visits. Next slide. To summarize, the city's property standards bylaw has a specific section that covers heritage properties and how they may be maintained to a minimum standard, and that Richmond Hill uses a complaint-based approach to enforce these standards. Though there are diverse tools available for municipalities to enforce these heritage property standards.
Thank you very much, everyone, for that presentation. Our Director of Community Standards, Tracy Steele, our Manager of Urban Design, Joanne Lung, and Urban Design Heritage Planner, Pamela Vega. Thank you very much. I didn't see this presentation attached to the minutes. Would it be possible for staff to circulate that back to committee members? There's a lot there to absorb, and I'm sure people will be interested. In particular, I think our designation subcommittee would have some thoughts around that, or would like to review that in more detail.
Through you, Chair, we will circulate the presentation to committee members for you.
Thank you. Can I have a motion for item 5.1 to receive this presentation before we call for discussion? Thank you, Doris. Discussion. Any questions for staff on this presentation? Dan, please go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. It's a great presentation. I really appreciate seeing this. It raises a lot of questions for me. And I think if I gave a couple of examples and used that as a starting point, that sort of would help clarify some things. And just to put it in context, the committee gets to see these buildings at the end of this whole process, where they would have gone through these different stages of being maintained or being designated, or listed and everything. And eventually it comes to us in various ways, and I'm really focusing right now on the demolition side of it. So there are three examples that I sort of picked from our past experience that I picked them for different reasons. So one, for example, is the most blatant one is the Dr. Duncombe Hall. That was a designated property, and eventually over 10 years or so came into disrepair, and we had to agree to demolish the building. The second one is actively a designated property, but we have had representations that perhaps it's not in a good state of repair and really should be either moved or demolished, and that's the Jefferson Schoolhouse. And the third one is it's a building that's vacant. I believe it's designated. It's 33 Roseview, and it's just sitting there. And I know from a previous committee meeting or meetings of I think the adjustment, where neighbors have brought up and I know complained that sort of thing. So it's gone through a process very much like what you've shown. And my question, and I do appreciate when I look at this, I get a better picture of the trade-off between the amount of resources it takes to maintain this, the distinction between a regular building and a heritage building, and the emphasis on how to correct the situation, whether it's one where you're using a stick or using a carrot to try to maintain these buildings. So my question is, like, given all this information that we've just seen, how is it that, say, for example, the Dr. Duncombe, we go through to the state where we got it to? I'm more interested in sort of getting, maybe Pamela's or Joanne's or Tracy's general comments on the system as a whole. And I see it as more balancing various aspects, but do they see weaknesses in the system? Has there been alternatives looked at in the past, that sort of thing? So it's a very general question, but I appreciate your experience with going through this process and maybe just giving a bit of a commentary as to from that perspective that I'm bringing up with those examples. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
I think maybe
which staff, Joanne, would you like to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I think that Dan, we can talk about this for months. I think it's I would have to say that heritage is never an easy subject, especially when there's a development potential involved. For 10027 Duncombe Hall, there has, 10 years ago, there has been a big, interest in the redevelopment of the project. And I think that both staff and the owner were in, positive mode. I mean, to try to make this work. And because it's in the downtown area, intensification is limited and the cost of the land. So without bringing not coloring the whole process, what happened was that, the delay of the discussion, the negotiation in terms of the building intensification, the development processes, it's actually taking a lot of hold on the building itself, while the owner has not been very diligent in keeping the the property in its best shape. And I think that the difficulty is when Tracy mentioned is that when we start charging people or putting, then it slows down, that it seems to diminish the amount of ability for us to negotiate. And I think that it is always that difficulty of believing that this negotiation is going to bring us to a closure, and yet it didn't work. And then something got delayed. And I think that I would not be able to describe a systematic problem because I don't know what the solution could be. It has to do with the owner. The owner is, could be more ambitious than he is able to afford. And so it brings to a head. Similarly for the Jefferson Schoolhouse, the previous owner also really does not have the ability to redevelop it, but he harbored ambition to do so. And so again, they go into a very lengthy development process where we are trying to negotiate on something that might not be possible. And so that becomes the heritage property becomes the field of contention, and the property itself, the structure itself, got overlooked because it was really overlooked. I don't know if Patrick could add to it because he's involved in all of that as well.
Sure, thank you, Jan. Just a couple of thoughts in dealing with the Duncombe Hall one. That's an example where we had a designated building and the property owner had filed a development application, with an intent originally to incorporate part of the building into the redevelopment. And very often, redevelopment applications stretch over a number of years. And, even when the application for redevelopment was first filed, the building was in, not great shape. And then you add 6 or 7 years and 6 or 7 winters and things get worse and worse. One thing I'd like to sort of look into is the ability to, kind of instantly require property owners of designated buildings, when they've applied for a development application, to bring them to a minimum standard before the planning department even processes the application. Now, what I am not 100% sure about is our sort of legal ability to do that. I've seen some things in the past where planning departments won't process somebody's development application if you owe back taxes, or if you're not in compliance with other sort of municipal bylaws, one of which would obviously be our heritage bylaw. So, that's an instance where the city's got a little bit of control. When somebody wants something from the city, i.e. approval of a development application, and you own a heritage designated structure, can we sort of utilize that leverage to say, okay, we're happy to look at your development application. This is great. You're proposing some investment in the property and the area, but before we start, you're going to at least shore this up or shore that up so that the property doesn't denigrate any further. So I'd like to look into that to see what ability we might have. That would sort of help this particular situation, when you've got somebody with a development application. The arguments we always get back are, oh, well, I'm going to preserve it. I'm going to do this, and I'm not going to spend any money now because I'm going to maybe knock down half of it, and the plan is to preserve half of it in the new development. But at the same time, often the development application never comes to fruition. And that was the case in this one. And over the 6, 7, 8, 10 years or whatever it is, the building becomes in worse and worse condition. And the next thing you know, it's unsavable. So something I think that we in the planning department could look into.
Yeah, I think, you know, I do appreciate all that. And I mean, I struggle with it myself because I know really there has to be a balance here between the people that own these properties or want to do something with it and you know, what our resources are within the town and stuff. You know, slides 10, 11, and 12, and even 13, the benchmarking is very helpful to try to appreciate a little bit more. One thing I was thinking of on the slide that shows the spectrum, is there something in the middle where it's a complaint based, but it can also be proactive to some extent. So a thought I had is maybe a vacancy register, for example, so that would highlight to the town that this is in a stage that they can sort of throw resources at it as necessary or periodically, but still maintain more of a complaint-based system. On slide 12, where we're talking about enforcement options, a thought I had is that the new legislation that's coming through, and I think Pamela's going to talk to this a little bit more later on, does take an approach of more like a stick approach where they increase what the fines can be, that sort of thing. So the municipality may have some flexibility in how it goes about doing that. And I think I understood, like with those enforcement options, it looks to me like there's also a scaling sort of thing that goes on. So you can start off with tickets, and then if you get into charges, there's more resources because you're going to have to go the legal route, that sort of thing. And then the municipality doing it themselves. And then the municipal benchmarking was very interesting to me because it does show the majority of the people are doing it on a complaint basis as opposed to a proactive basis, probably because of the resourcing. So I found this presentation very helpful in trying to understand things. And I brought those examples out not to complain about the way we do it, more to just try to get an appreciation and to share with the group, you know, what some of the positives and the negatives are, I guess, of the whole process. So I appreciate that very much. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan. Doris, I know you had your hand up earlier. Would you still like to speak to this item? Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you for the presentation. I thought it was a very worthwhile presentation, very informative. And I especially appreciate Patrick's comments because I think he has kind of identified, I think, the issue that we have where we have designated properties that end up coming in front of us for demolition permits because they've been neglected. And what we need to do, I think, is find different ways of ensuring that properties don't get neglected. And I think that, you know, having property owners invest to maintain the property until they get the proper approvals so that they can move forward with their development, I think is a great approach. And I would encourage Patrick to continue exploring that. And also for the team to look at different other mechanisms we could use. My other comment has to do with the enforcement approach. And having worked in compliance field before, I get the spectrum of proactive to complaints driven. And I understand that the resourcing challenge and that the challenges that the city may have. And I'm wondering if there's an opportunity to, pick up on the comment around educating and informing people from two perspectives. I think maybe there's a need for us to inform owners of designated properties what their responsibilities are, what their accountabilities are under the standards bylaw, and that there is a special section for heritage properties to make sure that they're aware of it so that we can prevent deterioration of existing properties. I also, because this is very much a complaints-driven enforcement approach, which I understand the purpose of it and why it's a complaint-driven approach, that maybe what we need to do is to inform the municipality or the community, the residents of the municipality at large about the fact that, you know what, if you see a designated property or aware of one where it's not being properly maintained, you can reach out to the enforcement folks so that they could look into it to ensure that that property, that designated property, continues to be protected. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Doris. This item is basically receiving a presentation. Were you thinking of making a recommendation here for staff to take back with regards to what the last part of what you said?
I would like that to be a recommendation if possible. Yes, Chair.
Thank you. So perhaps with the clerk's assistance, we can draft perhaps a part addition to the item 5.1 as a recommendation from this committee to be voted on. So Doris, you would like to move that motion, which would be that Heritage Richmond Hill recommends to staff. And if you can fill in the blanks, please. You're muted though.
I would like that Heritage Richmond Hill recommend to staff that they explore different mechanisms for ensuring that designated properties continue to be properly managed and that they meet the standards of the bylaw while the owners are waiting developmental or development permits and approvals or proceeding with their development. I also would like to recommend that staff explore the opportunity to educate and inform property owners of designated property of their responsibilities under the bylaw, and that there be an opportunity or there be a mechanism in place, or that residents of Richmond Hill are informed as to what's in the bylaw so that they can reach out to the city if they see designated properties being deteriorating because of lack of maintenance of the property.
Okay, how much of that was captured after the Ryan,
it's not bad. I sort of through you, Chair. So just the last part, I will clean this up, but I think I got most of it. The last part about, I guess, a mechanism to inform residents, I guess, what is in the bylaw, and I missed the last part about speaking to the city about.
So Ryan, if I may, maybe it's about, and that there is an education to inform residents, an education drive to inform residents of what is in the bylaw and their ability to advise the municipality of any designated properties not being properly maintained. So it's a matter of using the eyes and ears of the municipality to let the city employees know that there is a designated property that's not being properly maintained, so that they can go and talk to the designated property owner and have the lack of maintenance addressed.
Thank you. So Doris, you're making a motion to amend item 5.1 with the additional 2 lines here.
Sorry, through you, Chair, as Doris moved the original motion, we don't have to make a motion to amend per se. We can just add this as her original motion.
Okay, I'm good with that. Thank you. So
through the chair, excuse me, through the chair.
Sorry, go ahead, Joanne.
Ryan, would it not be recommend to council that direct staff to explore?
Correct. I just give me a few minutes to clean this up.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that it's not going to work if it is directly.
Correct. Yeah. Give
okay,
me
that's
one
fine.
second.
That's what I needed to bring up.
Yeah.
Good point. Thank you. We're in good hands here. Al, I see your hand up. Did you have a comment?
Yes, Mr. Chair, just 2 things. I appreciate all the work that staff put into this, and it's certainly give us a lot of information that we can work with and come up with some great options. And I do think Doris is really onto something. Not to take away the momentum, though, I'm just wondering, is this something we can step back for a moment and come back with this motion? It's not necessarily something that we need to rush at this moment, and I think it's very important that we get it right. The other point, just from a procedural point of view, is that perhaps this could be considered a motion from the floor, which wouldn't necessarily change our agenda, and we could still have the item that we're working on, and that this would just be an ab initio motion, so to speak, a brand new one, that we could work on if we choose to proceed with it at this time.
I see your point, Al. I'm supportive of Doris's amendment here personally, but would like to hear from others. We can also call a vote on that if that's what we end up doing. So Marge, please go ahead. And please unmute.
Just for Patrick, some clarification. If there were these changes, it would only be anyone who had purchased now has property. Would they retroactively be subject to these changes, to these extra requirements, or would it be more for those moving forward in any new acquisitions of property?
Well, there's a couple of different things we're discussing here. I think they're all good ones. When it comes to something that has a development application along with it, as I mentioned, we can look into that. The other thing is that's been spoken about is sort of an educational campaign. Maybe where city staff issue a letter to all owners of designated properties that just sort of kindly and gently remind them of their, almost moral duties to keep the property kept up in terms of the property standards bylaw. And we do that in a very nice way. We'd say, it's not that your property is not being kept up, but this is letters being sent to all heritage property owners, just simply to, kind of remind them of the great, resource that you are the owner of. Then the other thing is that's been spoken of is, just sort of more of a general public campaign that, Richmond Hill has a number of heritage designated properties, and some of these are vacant, and if you happen to see things that aren't being kept up or maintained, and you wish to identify those to staff, you could do so as kind of part of a civic duty or something like that. So there's different things happening here, and I think it's just a matter of getting the recommendations and the direction sort of correct for each one of them. And I think Ryan's trying to do his best here behind the scenes to come up with a proper recommendation.
Thank you, Patrick. Councillor West, I saw your hand up. If you want to speak, please go ahead.
Thank you. Actually, I might be better off to read this before I speak. Is that okay?
Sure.
Could I just ask a question, just generally there?
Dan, is that you speaking? I can't see all images here, but please go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, it is Dan. I just wanted to ask a quick question, and it relates to the legislation. Maybe Pam could talk to this, or Patrick. In there, they do talk about removing heritage. It may not relate directly to exactly what we're talking about, but it has to do with not maintaining it properly where heritage attributes, especially on designated properties. They've increased the fines. Does that require the city then to review their bylaws and maybe that section where you talk about stuff with regards to fines and how you enforce things? Will there be a review on that, or is that something that has to be initiated through a motion, or how does that work?
Maybe I can speak to that. I'm not sure exactly what change. It's Tracy speaking, in case you can't see. I'm not sure exactly what change in which legislation you're talking about, but under the property standards bylaw and the heritage amendment to the property standards bylaw, the fines are actually set by the justice. So there's a minimum and maximum, and typically when a fine minimum or maximum gets raised, then it affects the justice's decision after we lay a charge. So we don't necessarily need to amend anything at the municipal level, but I may be speaking out of turn because I'm not sure if that's exactly what you're talking about in this case.
Thank you for that. Councillor West, did you have enough time to review that?
I did. Okay, so can I just, before I say anything then, so can I ask Patrick and I guess Tracy and Joanne and Pamela, I think I'm okay with the wording. I mean, I think there's probably going to be the main thrust of this motion is the exploration of different things. I mean, I think it's important as a committee with something that's as complex as this issue that we don't, mandate that that staff does it in a particular way. What we're asking for is the intent of what is being asked for in this motion be explored as to how we can fulfill that intent. Are all the various staff people, I mean, we're okay with doing this exploration. You don't see any major barriers to us being successful here?
No, I think that we can explore all of these things and report back to the committee and provide some options to the committee with, some very specific language, in a couple of months on these matters. So yeah, you're quite right. The exploration gives us the ability to sort of get things right.
Okay. All right. Well, so that's what I was hoping to hear. So Doris, good job. I mean, I think this is actually, I mean, as a counselor, I can tell you that, I get complaints about various issues with property standards. The only thing that I would be concerned about, and I'll just say it because I think it's important to note this, that in my job as counselor, I do see some potential and for concern from people that live in heritage buildings or even buildings that are listed, that they feel sometimes that the weight of a lot of different things are resting unfairly on their shoulders because they chose to live in a designated building. And I don't want heritage building owners, who I found very frequently are really good at maintaining their building. They take a huge pride of ownership, and I don't want them to feel put upon by anything that we would with all good intentions be doing. So I think, Patrick, you kind of talked about this earlier, that we do not want to send a letter to somebody that lives in a heritage building and have them interpreted it that we're somehow putting extra burden on them and that the community is going to be watching them. That's not fair. But I think this can be done in a way that the bad apples that we're really trying to regulate here get the message, and they will get the message. So if we can have some extra teeth and diligence done in, maintaining buildings, particularly ones that are under development review, so that they don't deteriorate in the meantime, which I think is what I'm really hearing from the committee. So I think that this has the potential to be a very positive recommendation by the committee. So I will very much support it.
Thank you, Councillor, for that support. Any other comments on this motion by Doris before we call the vote? Dan, I see your hand up, please.
Yeah, sorry, just to follow up on David's point, I think the context of what we're talking about here are properties that are under development, of course, by and large, probably vacant properties. That's why I mentioned the registry. you could easily tie that into this, that the letter only goes to those properties that are registered and vacant or whatever. So I think there's a number of things that we can clean up, or in the analysis that the staff does, that can focus it more to those points that David's saying, to not, blindly just send it out to everybody. So.
Yeah. Thank you, Dan. And I think, as Patrick mentioned, explore is the key word here, and that's what we're asking staff to do, without any kind of presumption on what that exactly is at this point. So Al, with due respect, I'm going to call the vote on this, included right here under item 5.1. All those in favor of the motion as amended right now? Are there any opposed? Seeing none, thank you very much. That is approved. Good work, everyone. Moving on to item 5.3, heritage permit application and recommendation from planning and infrastructure staff. Can I have a motion for item 5.3?
Actually, Mr. Chair, just before we move on.
Yes, Councilor.
Are we, maybe this is to Ryan Bam, should we also then be moving a motion that was attached to 5.1 just to simply receive the presentation as a part of the minutes?
Through the chair, I put them in as together, so that won't be an issue. What we'll do is we will bring the exploration part of the motion to council as an extract, and then you have received the presentation.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Barb, I saw your hand up to move item 5.3. Thank you very much. Discussion on this topic. Any of the committee members have any questions for staff? Item 5.3 allows for the demolition of 11121 Leslie. Are there any comments regarding this item here before I call the vote? Okay, all those in favor of item 5.3? Are there any opposed? I see none. Item 5.3 is approved. Thank you. Moving on to item 5.4, we have designation subcommittee verbal update. And Dan Kelly will be presenting. Thank you. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, so just on the verbal side, just to follow up on, we had made a presentation some time ago about listing in the register some recommendations and principles that we wanted to go forward with. I did circulate some more detailed draft of that to staff and to the Historical Society through Marge. And I did get feedback from the staff. I haven't heard back from Marge. I would like to get something in the future. I just wonder if maybe that's going to take a little bit longer or what. So.
Can you elaborate, Dan, exactly what you want from the Historical Society?
So the attachments that I put together identify exactly the process that we're looking at, the involvement of stakeholders, namely the Historical Society, and the presentation of the principles that we're following through. And I just wanted to get some feedback as to whether they've ever done that sort of thing before, or whether they have any comments on whether they even want to be involved in something like that. Just in summary, what it is that point system of identifying a property, somebody raising that we should look at a property, and then a quick and simple evaluation to get it to a point where we would say this is worth pursuing a little bit further, and then going into more detail. And that point system is subjective to some extent, but it's not just staff doing it. And I've actually got the Heritage Committee people involved in that, but also outside of our particular group, like the Historical Society, that somebody could look at that. They could fill out this form that we've, or evaluation. Again, not these are not for people that are experts in the area, but certainly have a vested interest and do identify it. And then they would feed back into the process. And that's basically the attachments. We're sort of trying to describe that at a little bit more detailed level than what I had just said. So.
Okay, so you're asking if the historical society would support the concept, would support being involved, and is it something that like staff and is approves? Like that, I think is where the confusion was, and we brought it forth, and like the discussion didn't go very well.
Yeah, no, it is basically somebody from the Historical Society filling out a form, somebody from the Heritage Committee filling out a form, and maybe even staff filling out a form, or any other heritage stakeholder, like maybe an architectural society filling out the form on this particular property, combining all those evaluations together, passing them through to the committee for the committee to say, can staff take it forward? And then I've identified the process on how that would go through in detail. So that's all it is. It really is a question. Do they want to be involved? Are they interested? Have they done something like this before? Feedback to us so that we can get a sense of maybe not reinventing the wheel, but you're sort of trading on other people's experiences and sort of going through this process.
Can I get some comments from staff as to, like, is this something that is possible, that there would be this change and this is how heritage properties would be designated? Like, I think those were, and I'm sorry, we brought it up at an executive meeting and I didn't follow up, so I apologize about that, but it was just so, they were confused. Can I have
through the chair, my understanding is this process is purely a process suggested by the designating subcommittee to assist in identifying potential property that could be included into the list for the inventory. And I think that it is simply an potential system to explore how those properties can be identified. It is, Dan has a discussion with us staff, and I understand he has done a lot of work in sort of reviewing what has been done in other heritage area, and the point system is one that he had come up with to see if it works. So it really is something that that is initiated by Dan's group, and it is something that he would like to propose so that in his view could potentially assist staff in terms of our workload. I think that the intention is to have the committee, yourself, and maybe other community group to share to participate in the identification of some of these potential heritage properties. Dan, did I describe this correctly?
Yeah, and again, the reasoning for doing this is that the legislation has changed, so people can now, owners can now object to being put on this list. So this gives a discipline to the process that exists. Plus, it involves more of the community other than just simply staff in this committee.
Like I actually see me being the Historical Society being a representative on this committee that fulfills that. That's how I interpret it. Am I wrong there?
No, it can very much be only that if you want. I wanted to sort of.
You wanted to go beyond that, okay?
Yeah, I mean, if you feel it's not worth doing that, then you don't have to take it to them.
Well, no, I think I should, but I was just confused as to the whole, what the request actually, the process of the request. So I'm going to put it forth to them again at the next executive meeting and I'll get back to you.
And I can be with you on that if you want, if there's questions that come up that maybe.
Okay, I will propose that. Yeah, of course. We're not gonna do-
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, thanks a lot.
okay,
Appreciate that.
sorry, Dan.
Nope, no problem.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Can I have a motion for item 5.4.1 to for the request to update the 2009 Heritage Policy Review and Key Directions Report as a recommendation from the subcommittee that council directs staff, item 5.4.1A.
Can I just make a contextual introduction to that?
Let's get the motion and then we'll have the discussion for sure. Doris, thank you. And discussion, please. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, so I mean, this motion actually comes from the last session that we had, where we had a discussion that ended up basically saying the committee had an opportunity to input to the official plan. So I found that in the past, 10 years ago when we did the official plan, there was this report that was done, and I thought it was fairly good because it does identify certain gaps, but it also has some good feedback into the official planning process that Patrick mentioned before. And I thought it would give us an opportunity to be involved, us as the community, the committee, to be involved in this. So to start it off was simply to just update this, because there has been a number of changes over the years. And included in that would be involvement of our committee through that process. And the focus that the subcommittee has had recently has been more towards the changes in legislation. We've used that as our work list. And so one of the things that we talked about just now was the listing process. It was identified as a gap, for example, on that 2009 policy review. But there are other things that we've been talking about in the subcommittee that relate to what is the heritage strategy that we have? What is the city's strategy? What is this committee's strategy? That can be incorporated into this as well. So I thought it was very important to put that in the context of why we're putting this motion forward to update this report. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Dan. Any thoughts, comments on item 5.4.1, the motion that is on the floor? I see no further comments. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? I see none. That is approved. Thank you.
Through the chair, just some housekeeping.
Yes.
We got a mover for 5.4. We certainly just did 5.4.1. So just want to go back, because I know there was some discussion between Dan and Marge regarding.
Thank you for that. So we will require a motion for 5.4 that the verbal update be received.
Correct.
Dan, thank you. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? I see none. 5.4A is approved. Thank you, Ryan. Moving on to item 5.5, there is a verbal update to be received. Can I have a motion for item 5.5? Helen, thank you very much. Pamela, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a pretty quick update. Just a little background. Back in 2019, just when this committee was getting off the ground, the Ontario Heritage Act was amended through the More Homes, More Choice Act. And this received ascension back on June 6, 2019. But the regulations to support these new policies were not yet finalized. So this new Ontario Heritage Act was not actually in effect. The province wanted to wait until these regulations that supported this act were finalized before making these changes come into effect. The plan was originally to have these draft regulations be circulated to the public for commenting throughout the end of 2019, and then have them come into effect hopefully in 2020. This was pushed back because of the pandemic. Then the new proposed date for the regulations to be released was January 1st of this year. The day came and went and we didn't receive any regulations. And this past January 12th, we received word from the Assistant Deputy Minister of the Heritage, Tourism and Culture Division, Kevin Finnerty, that the proclamation of the amendments and the regulations have been delayed with no new date set in stone just yet. This delay is in response to requests from municipalities and heritage organizations to provide enough time to prepare for implementing the new processes that are necessary to comply with the regulatory changes. And with the ongoing pandemic, the January 1st proclamation date was not deemed as a feasible date. And so, as I said, we have not been provided with a new proposed proclamation date. We also have been told that drafts of an updated Ontario Heritage Toolkit will be posted sometime in the future as well. And it will be around this time that these new regulations will be released. And Richmond Hill staff will advise you of any further updates from the ministry. So right now, the Ontario Heritage Act is, as it was before, we are not implementing the new policies just yet.
Thank you very much, Pamela. Are there any questions for Pamela? Dan, please go ahead.
Sorry. I just clarified from my notes when I was referring before about increasing in fines and stuff like that with regards to the new legislation. So it had to do with demolitions and altering versus demolishing. In there, they talk about increasing fines from 50,000 to $1 million. So that's what I was alluding to before. So I guess the question to Pamela is that in the legislation that's been postponed, or was that just a proposal that never got through, or I don't know, and we can get back to you? Thanks.
Thank you, Dan.
Through you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
I believe that it is through the Ontario Heritage Act itself. In the past, it has been up to the municipality whether these fines are ever enforced. They usually have not because they tend to be quite contentious or political in nature. So it's been a harsh stick that municipalities don't often use.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on this for staff? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor of receiving this item? Are there any opposed? I see none, the item is received. Thank you. Can I have a motion for the date of our next meeting being Tuesday, February 9th, 2021? Motion for the next date. Thank you, Helen. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? I see none. The date of next meeting is approved. And before I call for adjournment, I want to thank all our volunteers, and special thanks to our staff who put so much effort and care in bringing these matters to this committee. So with that, can I have a motion to adjourn? Marge, all those in favor? Are there any opposed? Seeing none, meeting is adjourned.